humans uniquely share a spiritual attribute with God and the angels above them, like love, language, um, imagination, and a creative spark. But also, humanity has physical attributes. We are physical beings as well as spiritual. So our physical attributes are much like the animals below us on the chain of being. That our materials bodies experience emotions and sensations, strong ones like anger and sadness, lust, or pain, and we have physical needs like hunger and thirst. So these are the 7 Hermetic principles. Now, the 7 Hermetic principles is mostly written about in a book called the Kybalion. The Kybalion is very known in Hermetic circles, even though it's quite a recent book in the Hermetic tradition. But you can see these principles expressed in older Hermetic works, like the Corpus Hermetic. So the first principle is the principle of mentalism. The all is mind. The universe is mental. This principle embodies the truth that, quote, all is mind. It explains that the all, the creator, God, the source, which is reality, underline all the outward manifestations and appearances which we know under the terms of, quote, the material universe, the life, matter, energy, and is short what is clear to us in our material senses. It is spirit. So, to put that simply, Hermeticism proposes the idea that your mind, when you think, your conscious and subconscious, your thoughts, the universe operates in the same way. So, for example, Hermes even says this himself in the Corpus Hermeticum. He says, think in your mind of a place, any place in the world. And in your mind, you are already there. You can just see somewhere in your mind, just like that. Click, click, click. It's there. I can imagine a place I've been to before. I remember it instantly. It's a powerful machine. Now, Hermeticism teaches that God, the universe, works like that, but on a much more wider scale. So that kind of really expresses how, near infinite and unknowable the source is. So all things are, it's like that's the spirit of reality. And then the second principle is the principle of correspondence. That principle of correspondence is very important, especially in ceremonial magic. So, like I said before, with the as above, so below. So below, so above. This principle embodies the truth that there is always a correspondence between the laws and the phenomena of various planes of being and life. So everything in this world and the other world and worlds beyond that all correspond. They interact with each other. So, let me see. Yeah, so it's like they all connect. There's when you do, for example, let me just give you a quick example. When you do a magical ritual, you are doing the physical magical ritual. In a temple or whatever, you have a magic circle, you're all dressed up, etc., etc. And you're physically doing the ritual, you're doing the incantations, the invocations, the prayers, what have you. Now, you're doing that physically. But the key to understanding this Hermetic principle is understanding that you are also doing this ritual on the astral plane simultaneously. That's where the magic happens. That's where the spiritual kicks in. They are both working at the same time. The material plane, the astral plane are not separate places. They are interwoven and they are connected and they affect each other. And this is further expressed in the third principle, the principle of vibration. Even if it's the tiniest subatomic movement, everything is in a constant ebb and flow. And that relates to the correspondence. Everything is interacting with each other, to the tiniest levels to the largest levels. Everything is going on. The universe is a living organism, constantly interacting. It is life. There is no death. This is what Hermeticism says. Because everything is alive, death is just a little component of the far greater mechanism at play. If we go on to the fourth principle, the principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature, but different in degree. Extremes meet. It explains that in everything there are two poles and opposite aspects, and that the opposites are really only two extremes of the same thing, with many varying degrees between them. So, Hermeticism is not a dualistic system, even though at first glance it can appear that way, but it isn't. The principle of polarity combats that. So, things can appear to be dual nature. They can, good or evil, hot or cold, what have you. But Hermeticism teaches that hot and cold are the same thing. It is temperature. They are just different degrees. They're just the two extremes of each other. But if they're shifted, they come closer and they can change. It's the same thing. Good and evil, the same thing. Everything is a part of one thing. And the one thing being the cosmos, which in itself is a part of the mind of God. So the fifth principle is the principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything. The measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. This principle embodies the truth that in everything there is a manifested or measured motion, to and fro, a flow and inflow, a swing backward, swing forward, a pendulum-like movement, a tide like ebb and flow, a high tide and a low tide. So basically that just continues the principle of polarity and correspondence. All the principles, this is what I like about the Hermetic principles, is they all complement each other. You can see all of them in each other. And they work very well. So that's basically saying an action has another action. And that continues into the next principle, the sixth principle, the principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. It explains that everything happens according to law, that nothing ever merely happens, that there is no such thing as chance, only a law unseen by us. So basically this is just saying that everything happens for a reason, even though it could be something that would we can't even comprehend why this would happen. But there is, Hermeticism teaches us that there is a cause for it, and it all plays part in a much greater body, a much greater mechanism, system. And the final principle, the seventh principle, the principle of gender. So what this pertains is, so gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. This principle embodies the truth that there is gender manifested in everything. The masculine and feminine principles ever at work. This is true not only of the physical plane, but of the mental and even spiritual planes. So, to put that simply, the principle of gender is more of an extension of the principle of polarity. But the principle of gender is understanding how certain energies interact with each other. So there are certain energies and certain things that you could say are of a masculine archetype, and then there are others who are more of the archetype of the feminine. It's not really talking about, say, physical sex, biological sex, a man or a woman. It is just a way of understanding certain aspects of this world, the astral world, and the spiritual worlds. So really, it is just a kind of tying the knot on all of the principles, but especially the principle of polarity. So that is the Hermetic principles. There are some books I would recommend just before we take questions. So if you do want to do some further reading, there is the Kybalion, The Tree of Life, The Way of Hermes. This is a translation, a good one, of the Corpus Hermeticum. And if you really do want to delve into Western occult tradition, kind of bouncing off Hermetic philosophy, then you would probably want to check out, or look into at least, the three books of occult philosophy by Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. That is kind of considered the grandfather of all occult books. So I highly recommend. So yeah, I would like to take questions now.
Well, thank you for the lecture. It was interesting. I didn't know much about Hermeticism. I understand it to be a path of enlightenment more than anything. My question is, are there like guidelines, like values or way that you should behave that are kind of recommended in the Hermetic path? Or is it just like commune with God and then you'll know? Like, is there a set of values basically that is particular to Hermeticism?
Right, yeah, that's a good question. It is, yeah, well, it would be, because Hermeticism is an interesting philosophy because it kind of mixes with other religions and other philosophies quite well, especially Christianity. And it did for a time, especially in the Renaissance. So for that kind of moral and ethical framework, it was kind of more based off kind of Christian values. But if we kind of just don't want to focus too much on a Christian value, but kind of see like what does Hermeticism pertain to, it does have a moral compass. It does say, if you are going to do magic, you do it to help people. You do it to be good to others, charity. And if you do magic for a selfish reason to gain selfish goals, then that would be considered in Hermeticism to be a bad thing. So a good way, so to answer your question, really, it would kind of just be the golden rule. Don't be cruel to people, be a nice person and you'll be rewarded.
Don't
for
be
it,
selfish,
basically.
right?
Yeah, essentially, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that. It's also interesting to realize that, for example, in the Renaissance, things really changed, which eventually led to what we know as humanist philosophy today. So, in that sense, there's a great deal of virtue, ethics, morals, and so on involved in this kind of stuff.
Well, first off, thank you for doing the lecture. I really enjoyed it. And the second thing, I think I'm maybe a little unclear about the when you were going through the 7 principles. The first one I think was mentalism, and how that relates to God, because I think you said before, unless I'm remembering it, that God was kind of outside the system looking in, but mentalism has it that the universe is working as a brain. So my question, I suppose, is the Hermetic view of God outside the system, or is it the system? Like, is it or do we exist in the brain of God in this system,
Right.
or is it on the outside?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question, and something that I had to tangle with in my early years with Hermeticism, and it's kind of the big question. The only way I can put it is that God exists simultaneously in the created world, but also the uncreated world. So it's kind of like, it's hard to pin down. It's one of those, but it's like, Hermeticism does purport that we are quote unquote within the mind of God, but that is just a way of language to explain it. So it's kind of like the way I understand it is that you can understand, so there is the unmanifested and the manifested. So the manifested would be the world, the universe, the brain of God, the conscious thought, whereas the unmanifest would be the subconscious of that, the kind of the unknowable source. So if you think of it like God being outside of it would be the unmanifest, where this kind of nothingness is the only way we can understand it, kind of feeds into the manifest being our world. So when those ideas come into the manifest from the unmanifest, that those ideas coming in would be kind of God expressing himself and then creating in the material, in the world, should I say, sorry, in the universe. So it is kind of, it's kind of like high metaphysical theology. You kind of have to like, sometimes there's a little bit of mental gymnastics. It's one of those tough ones, and kind of in the system it's kind of just chalked up to, well, it's just a great mystery. It's one of those that we maybe will never crack.
Well,
So it's kind of just like divine mystery, you know.
if I may chip in, it's kind of a Buddhist specialty to speak about nothingness and emptiness all the time. So I think
I mean, yeah.
so you
Buddhism
know,
is good for that.
one very simple way, traditional way to understand that in Buddhism is to think of yourself as the wave and as of the universe as the ocean. So you're basically a manifestation, a temporary manifestation of the whole. And like if you dig deep in the ocean, nothing is moving, right? Everything is quiet, and it looks like there's no current, there's nothing. It's very, very quiet. But yet, if you move to the surface, you will see that there are lots of waves and lots of manifestations. So that's kind of a traditional image there to explain how kind of God works in the universe. Like there is the unseen, quiet part, and there is all of these materialistic illusions that you have in your daily life around you. So I don't know if that helps, but it's yeah, it's one of
I
the
think it helps.
big...
I think I have a better understanding of what is thought of in this, and as well as Buddhism.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
One more thought to add to your thought jar there in this regard is the way that I've seen it explained in some Hermetic writings is, the one way an all-encompassing being could create without really taking away from itself or working outside of itself would be maybe something akin to a dream or a mental process or, maybe something of that sort.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm just a little bit curious about the historical context of these ideas. You mentioned that the historicity of Hermes Trismegistus is a little bit doubtful, but I guess what is the state of the scholarship on where these ideas came from? Ultimately, I guess.
That's a good question.
I have a vague. Sorry, go on.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. No, yeah. Well, it's heavily contested, but the accepted kind of dating would be AD, after Christ. So around the time of the early church, maybe later, when there was, Gnosticism was kind of coming out, and Manichaeism and Hermeticism propped up at that time, these different philosophies that intermingled around the Mediterranean. Hermeticism, some Hermeticists, and in the tradition I was initiated into and taught to, how my teacher taught it to me, and how his teacher, etc., etc., it was pointed to me that there is the Hermetic belief that Hermeticism was around before Christ, and that the Hermetic teaching was kind of like a foreshadowing for the coming Christian religion. But that's debated heavily. There is no real academic evidence for that. It's more of kind of like Hermetic lore. But the accepted understanding was probably early centuries after Christ. around that period. I'd say between I don't know, like around just before 300 AD, maybe around that time. To my understanding, anyway.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, there's also some associations with the Egyptian god Thoth and Hermes Trismegistus.
Yes, yes. Hermetic tradition says that yes, that Hermeticism was the secrets of the pharaohs. It goes back to Egypt. Yeah, there is the belief in Hermeticism that Hermes Trismegistus is Thoth. The Egyptians over time deified him as a god of wisdom, but in their very, very ancient history, Hermes Trismegistus was around in Egypt or that area and taught the mysteries, his teachings, and over time they just came to kind of worship him as a deity called Thoth.
So I've got kind of another little question, if either one of you or any of you know the answer to it, and that's that
Yeah, sure.
you were talking about, let's see if I can remember, we're gonna test to see my listening comprehension. There's theurgy, and then there's wonderwork, and then there's the G1. Goetia, thank you. And something that I noticed when you were talking is that you could only do wonderwork if you came from a position of theurgy. But it seems that since they acknowledge the possibility of goetia being a thing, couldn't you do sorcery to help other people and thus kind of go from the bottom up to
Right.
wonderwork?
Well, it would that in itself would become. So, for example, let me just use myself as an example. So, hermetics can purport that if you're using, say, for example, like talismans or sigils that have already been made by someone, you don't really need to do much of your own work on it. So you can kind of get a pass in that way if you're using whatever talisman to kind of, I don't know, bolster yourself. So then you're in a good position to then help someone. But with any magic, it all boils down to intent. Why are you doing this magical operation? What is the goal? And that's when you can kind of categorize it. Is it black magic or is it good magic, white magic, whatever you want to call it? So white magic would be like wonderwork, which is kind of like performing. You can call them performing miracles, doing kind of magical things for others, normally in the process to help them. Whereas goetia, sorcery, would be for selfish means, or even harming someone, if that's what you do.
I say that goetia for the benefit of others or the general good automatically becomes theurgy.
Okay.
Or you could say
essentially,
what sets goetia apart is skipping out on the moral responsibility of self-development, spiritual self-development.